Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming and being part of Wisconsin Waterfowl Association. I'm Peter Ziegler, the project habitat coordinator for the association. I'm going to give you a background on the habitat program for this past year, 2020. This picture in the background shows us a project we did in 2019 and actually did construction in July of 2019. And you saw it was about 6 months ago. As you can see right here, this is actually an old ditch line that we filled up with all the trees and brush that were growing along those ditch lines, along with plugging them on the ends. And what you have here is the ice this past winter. This total project is about 50 acres. There's obviously some uplands adjoining this, grassland stuff that was restored as well. But what you're looking at is some open water that's probably, I don't know, 10, 15 acres open water, 20 acres of emergent vegetation that's resulted in something that was formerly a field just 1 year ago. So why are wetlands so important? Well, wetlands are host to a variety of species for nesting, migration, breeding, overwintering. They play an important role, and that's why Wisconsin Waterfowl Association feels the habitat program is so beneficial. And the majority of our work coincidentally ends up being on private land, and there's a reason for that. There's a ton of opportunity. 75% of Wisconsin wetlands are privately owned. 85% of restorable wetlands are privately owned, and 80% of the species depend on wetland at some point in their life. So you can see how greatly wetlands play in this ecosystem and why the majority of our work actually ends up being on private lands. That doesn't mean we do exclusively private lands. We have a number of projects, and every year we have a couple projects on public lands, and we work cooperatively with a lot of partners on public land projects. But private lands is where the opportunity is, and if we ignored those opportunities, we wouldn't be able to sustain the population goals for waterfowl, but also many other wetland dependent species in the state that rely on them. AWA, Adopt a Wildlife Program. This is pretty much entirely run by volunteers of this organization. Kudos to all those that work on it because it's turned into a great hands-on opportunity for many volunteers that want to get out and do work on the ground and benefit the wildlife areas. So what it is Wisconsin Waterfowl Association enters into agreement with Wisconsin DNR, and we adopt a wildlife area. Rome Pond is one, and they do work out there, which helps the DNR out. It helps the DNR with some of their budgeting things and staffing that can't do things. But it's also there's some fun things. So this past year they worked on black tern nesting platforms. We'll talk about in a little bit. Wood duck box monitoring. You're putting them up, cleaning them out, tallying up what was successful, what wasn't. Tree clearing work, which is a whole and brush work that helps access and for wildlife. We'll touch on that a little bit. Weed whacking. Some of these are not real glamorous, but some are. And then there's the Lasky Marsh Wildlife Area in Lake Mills. This was one that we did as part of an AWA and as a grant that we applied for, where we tried to help enhance the nesting islands and the adjacent grasslands and the wetland itself. So we did a cattail burn of 200 acres. We removed trees on the nesting islands to benefit nesting waterfowl, and we moved some brush and woody debris that was encroaching in on the berms and in the grassland. Weed whacking. You can see by end of summer, coming close to water hunting times when waterfowl seasons are opening. You got to make these accessible and presentable to the public, and so our AWA crew did a lot of weed whacking, cutting out the signs and stuff so they're visible and that the parking lots are usable without getting full of thistles and everything else that might be growing in there. Trees. Tree and brush removal on berms is extremely important. DNR has a ton of berms, and they can't keep up on all the maintenance just because through historically they built a lot of berms and kind of let them go. And now we're paying the price where and they realize they need to get up on their maintenance. And so trees are extremely detrimental to berms. Anyone that has a berm should be removing any woody debris off them. The roots, grow through and create channels for water to flow, which ultimately causes them to fail and leak. Plus, as the trees get bigger, they tip over and they uproot because it's usually shallow, peaty soils, mucky soils, because they're in a wetland, and they create big holes that also cause those berms to fail. And the removal of the brush from the grasslands, the adjacent grasslands, and the nesting islands we worked on, you know, is greatly beneficial to the nesting waterfowl. Um, it reduces predation from both birds and ground, such as skunks and raccoons, because they love and they live in and love those big down woody willows on all those little islands that they work on. Raccoons will live on those and eat all your duck eggs. And then the black tern nesting platform. Mike Lamo gets all the credit for this program. He saw an opportunity where we had black terns nesting on one of our AWAs, and it was brought to his attention, or somehow he figured out that they were a species of concern in the state. He took it upon himself to start making nesting platforms because, upon his research, the limiting factor for black terns was nesting structure. And a lot of that is due to the fact that we have highly fluctuating water levels when they're nesting. These things are nesting on these little floating sod mats or bogs that are floating around. You get big inputs of water or a dam. They close a dam up, raise the water too quickly, they go under and the nest fails. So through trial and error, he had a couple different designs, and he found a design that was actually fairly successful this year. He had a couple different nesting pairs successfully produce broods. And the amazing thing is when we wrote about this in our newsletter, I got calls from Fish and Wildlife Service, DNR, some of the birding groups, because apparently they've had no success with their nesting platforms, and they were amazed that we designed something that worked, and they were interested. And so we're looking at possibly expanding that or seeing what we can do where we can help out to get other people to get them a outline of what we did and how to build something successful for this. So kudos to Mike for developing that and making a great impact for the black terns of Wisconsin. In the burn at Zalowski Marsh, we burned the dead cattails off of about 200 acres. Prior to burning the previous August, they were sprayed with an herbicide, so they were dead, so they were good and dry. Um, so burning it removes that biomass from this year and prior years, as everyone knows. Walking through them is quite honestly a pain because they get very thick. By removing that biomass, you get sunlight, you promote some native wetland vegetation growth, and you should hopefully be decreasing its percent cover area, so you can create some open water pockets within the emergent zones, which is beneficial for a lot of water birds and waterfowl because it gets better vegetation. They have opportunities to land and utilize some of those areas that were just dense cattails prior to that. So this is a map of the work WWA has done over the past years. You can see over here on the left-hand side the counties we worked in, the number of projects we did in those counties. Those are the ones that we carried out for the most part. And the numbers in the counties here are just kind of historical numbers where we've worked. So how do you get a project move through the process at WWA? We get calls or emails and things. What happens to that? Well, we do those as an intake. I get them and review them. And what I usually do is I do a little online remote review, looking at aerial photos, looking for features and things of that property, and what might be a possibility there, just based on soils and everything else happening out there, the drainage features, things like that. And then I make a call to the landowner. We talk about it, what they're looking for, what they might be wanting to get out of it, and those types of things. And then if we think it's a good project, it moves on to where I do an on-site review. I meet with the landowner, preferably, and we walk around, we see what it actually looks like, because sometimes online can be deceiving with some things, especially vegetation, and sometimes you can see drainage features that aren't present in air photos. Sometimes drainage features that aren't applicable. They might run across property lines and things, and then you can't do a project unless you have a neighboring landowner on board. So if it's a good project from that standpoint and it looks like it's going to work, then we start to develop. We do a survey, start to do a design, start to figure out the financial side of things, who pays for what, how much is things going to cost, getting partners involved. And then we'd go through permitting and contracting and construction. And then we can, once it's complete, we summarize the work and make sure the landowner has an idea of what is expected and what they can do to help maintain it to keep it in the best working order. And I always tell any landowner, maintenance wise, just give us a call if you got questions on things, and I give them you the basics of what they probably should look for and watch for, and what the baseline things to stay ahead of. Where's that funding come from? Where do we, to do that on the ground work? Well, WWA holds banquets and events, and that funding, a lot of that funding, pays for staff time and stuff to do survey, design, permits, the oversight, paying for some materials like water control structures. The other big chunk of it comes from grants, both state, federal, and private. A lot of those we target heavily for the contracting, excavating, materials. If you got to, buy seed or erosion control matting or water control structures. And landowner contributions. We haven't fully paid for. I can't remember last time if I have ever been on the oversight where we've paid for entire restoration. Landowners have a significant contribution. I would say on average, we are, depending on the project and the size, we're only paying maybe 20% at best. So landowners usually paying greatest in excavation and sometimes some material costs in there. So they have a significant contribution, which makes I think the program strong, because it's something they really want to do, and they're going to make sure that it works out right for them. And then we get partner contributions. We work with a lot of partners across the state. Fish and Wildlife would be our strongest one, but counties and other organizations that have funding have contributed to certain projects where appropriate and meets their goals. So what did WWA accomplish in 2020? Well, we installed 4 water control structures. We filled or plugged 7 different ditches. We seeded over 300 pounds of rice, which accumulated into a little over 133 acres of habitat completed through our program. It was it started out pretty slow. We because we work so closely with Partners for Fish and Wildlife Service, we had a couple projects that were on hold because as a federal agency, they weren't allowed to go out in the field until June or end of May, and so it put a lot of hold on some projects that we couldn't really move forward on. So we have a couple projects still sitting there waiting for winter. We'll talk about in a little bit, but hopefully we should come out just fine or right on average if we get some cold weather finally. And we have over 440 acres that we have to accomplish through our NACA grant, which ends in this September. That would be about 2.5 years worth of funding for that. We're very close, and we still have funding, so I suspect we'll be closer to about 500 acres of what we'll actually accomplish with that funding. So we have a great positive there that what we applied for, we're actually going to come out ahead on, and those granting opportunities and agencies always like to see that. So it shows that we're being fiscally responsible with our dollars, or their dollars and our dollars for that matter, to get as much habitat on the ground as possible. So what does a project process look like from this, the design standpoint? So here we have Green Lake County. Here's a project we did this past year. These are the survey points. We have, one basin here on the left, a second basin here in the middle, and then this here is also actually a wetland basin. kind of flatter, but it is a basin, and there's a ditch run right through all of this, right up through here, and then there's ditches running here, 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 out here, and down here. So there's considerable drainage on this area. So we did the survey, and then we is up here by letter A. That's what it looks like. Outlet there, that ditch is about 2 feet deep or so, so it's drained that entire basin. And then on the bottom picture, you see us piling up spoils from a scrape to generate some material to fill in the ditches. Here is ironically another project in Green Lake Colony, only a couple miles up the road from that last one. But here we're plugging ditches, we're scraping off all the debris on this upper end where we don't have to get good contact, and we'll let it fall through the ice and actually plug that ditch off, create a couple acre, about a 1 acre area of water, impacting about 3 to 5 acres. Setting water control structures, I like them when they're like this on the right because it's nice and dry. You don't have to do much. It's slightly frozen. It's easy. Like the ones on the left where you're in waders up to your waist in water is always a little more complicated and messy, but we get everything from the easy to the wet ones, and it's the way it goes because some of these projects just can't do them otherwise. Like this one on the left here, it's actually a ditch that we put a structure on, and we had to put the structure. We couldn't just plug the ditch because it would otherwise flood the right of way. This way, it allows the landowner to flood his wetland, but also take water off so at the correct level so that it doesn't flood the right of way or the neighbor's driveway, but allows him to keep as much water in his wetland as possible because before he didn't have that ability. I love these. These are very simple, and I don't see them real often, but enough where you have homemade structures. This is actually a farm access road back here, and these guys you'll see this, they'll put wooden structures on because that's what they thought would work, and they work a little bit but not real well, and then they rot out and fail. So we can just permit it and put a new pipe and structure in there that's going to last forever because it's plastic, it's not metal now, they won't rust away. And this is the same project in Fond du Lac County. The structure's down here. Here's the farm access road, which is actually acting as a berm, and it's good and solid. And you can see that blue line is the approximate flooding area. You can see that we're going to be flooding out some fields, and all that cattail that was in the background of that other picture will now probably remain more open water emergent because we'll flood it out permanently as needed. This picture is in spring, as you can see there's nothing planted in these fields yet. So this water actually is high, and what happens is when the water starts to drain down through this ditch out the bottom end of this picture, by July they're dry, and then the cattails just expand out and fill in that entire area. And so now they'll be able to store water in there probably year round if they would like to. Yeah, as I said before, we planted about 300 pounds of wild rice. We planted in Juneau Forest in Manitowoc County this year. Manitowoc County, some volunteers did that one. Whereas I was up in Juneau and Forest County seeding. You can see the seed and the rice in the background of the top photo is growing from a prior year. And then in the bottom photo, there was rice growing in this photo. This is fall, so it's now gone. But I also have a bunch of swans in there. And one of the biggest detriments to wild rice establishments are geese and swans. And these swans that actually pull up a good chunk, maybe half of what we seeded last year. So they're doing trying to keep the swans off of it. And we seed it again this year, and we'll seed it again next year because typically the proper way to do a wild rice seeding is to seed something 3 years in a row, where so you get good seed bank viability and building the seed bank so as you have good and bad years, it can kind of overcome things such as swan and geese predation or a bad year of rice seed production and things. So 3 years in a row, and I did mention or forgot to put on here, we actually also seeded in Oconto County at our Abrams property again for the second year. So I did forget to put that on, but we also seeded there. So this is that NACA grant we talked about where we're hoping to complete nearly 500 acres. This is the boundary of it. You can see there's straight lines and it covers a good chunk of the part of the state. This was based on a Wisconsin plan from 1992. You can see straight lines. That's this new plan, which is very beneficial. It was approved this year, and you can see these acreage and goals on the side. You know, Wisconsin Waterfall's biggest impact is going to be on restoring 183,000 wetland acres, and this is really these are the base acres needed to maintain the species population where we want them for majority of water birds and waterfowl almost specifically. So if you falls, you know, right up in here in this bluish green area. So that doesn't mean we can't work in those areas. We all acknowledge that those areas exist and that no one's going to disallow those projects because it ends up in a one or a two. They're just going to be more on a case by case basis. And when we find one of those, trust me, we're not going to walk away from it just because it's in a one or two watershed if it's still a really good wetland restoration. So currently we have 3 projects ready to go. They're all permitted. As I said earlier, we're really just waiting on some cold weather. If we can get some average, hopefully, temperatures here for the next month, we should be able to get those done. One is being worked on currently as we speak in Outagamie County, and 3 in the planning stages, meaning they've already gone through our process and getting designs. And we have a couple more that need surveys, and we'll go through that design work. And we also have a few more that come in as well. So Wisconsin Waterfowl has a couple committees, Habitat Committee being one, for obvious reasons, an important part of our organization. This committee consists of some volunteers, myself, the executive director, and some board members. And these are the goals, kind of our broad goals for the year. Grow the project list. Why do we want to grow the project list? Well, this is important because we'd ideally like to have 1 to 2 years of projects sitting there ready to go. Because it could help us in planning for grants and stuff, and just money in general. When we have projects sitting there, we know where they are, what we need to do, and what they're going to cost, instead of saying, all right, we're going to do 440 acres for this dollar amount, and then hopefully we can accomplish that. It makes it a lot simpler and also more competitive in some realms to have that list and that project. Okay, this is what it is. We know where it is. That's what we're going to do for those dollar amounts. A database, past and present, everything we've done, so we have something that we can easily look up what we're looking for, such as we're advocating for increasing the waterfowl stamp fee, and say a senator comes to Bruce Ross and says, hey, I want to go see a project done with duck stamp in my district. So right now he'd have to call me and say, hey, what have we done in whatever county? And I'd go and say, well, off the top of my head, I probably know what we did in the last 2 years, but let's just say we haven't done anything there in the last 2 to 3 years. We can go in and I look it up. I tell them here, this is what it is. Where's the database? We can just simply type it in, say, hey, these are the district's numbers for he or her, and it would pop up all our work there. When we did it, what we spent on it, the landowner's name, contact, all that good stuff. That's just one example. We can use it to look up, how many acres we did in a certain year, how many acres we did over, a 5-year period, things like that. It would just be very great for marketing and a whole bunch of other grant requests and final reports. I increased project visibility is somewhat along those marketing lines of trying to get our name out there more, what we're doing. People that don't know who we are or what we actually do, because we do a lot, but and a lot of hunters understand what we do, but there's a lot of groups out there and a lot of people on land that don't understand what we do is actually very beneficial, even if they aren't into hunting. And having wetlands that aren't even hunted are actually really beneficial and can be a great benefit in this state for those that do hunt. So it's getting into those newsletters of other organizations, putting signs up, all those things. Those are things we have to develop as part of that. Increasing volunteer opportunity, you know, getting more volunteers out there, similar to, some want to see what's going on, getting maybe some chapters to be able to get out and see some of our projects when they're in the works, things like that. Increasing our wood duck program efficiencies, um, getting that program, Eric Pitts, who passed away this year, really had developed and led and carried that program out. So by default, we have to, do something. But we have some volunteers that have some interest in stepping up to do some things that will actually probably increase our ability to get wood ducks houses out and the efficiencies within that program. So those are the goals of the overarching goals of the Habitat Committee, and how we reach those, some of those objectives we are currently working. And I want to thank everyone for coming. If you have questions, I may be available if technology allows. Otherwise, feel free to email or call me anytime. And thank you.